Right. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Taylor, and he is the doctor of chiropractic from Washington, Illinois. And today we're going to talk about autoimmune conditions, labs, and how to really get help with what you need in terms of your condition. I'm here with Dr. Taylor, who's also had Hashimoto's. And this is what I found really fascinating because I've never worked with a doctor who's actually had the autoimmune condition themselves. And I feel like it's really important to have both because they really understand how you're feeling and they're not just going by symptoms and like the textbook way of doing things because they're actually trying to cure themselves. So, Dr. Taylor here, and
Hello.
just want to welcome you. And maybe you can start by sharing your story.
Yeah, sure. So my story, I'm going to share a little more than my Hashi's story, and start with just how I got into functional medicine. I was practicing chiropractic, traditional chiropractic, and a lot of people get really great results, and it's a lot of fun. But the ones that kind of keep you up at night are the ones that aren't getting well, the ones that are kind of mysterious, and the ones that are like, gosh, what could we do, and what else are the doctors missing, and all these things. And so that led me into, lab work and supplement protocols and dietary advice and detox protocols. And so eventually I stopped doing chiropractic and started doing functional medicine. And my specialty was really becoming autoimmune conditions. And they're really mysterious. I'm really, really into immunology. I'm really into all that goes into it. And this was before I was diagnosed. So knowing and learning and helping people, I'd worked with and diagnosed, hundreds of people, and mostly women. Women outnumber men 7-1 with autoimmune conditions, but never really thought for myself. And I ran standard lab work, not standard, but like a pretty good sized lab panel on my dad. And I diagnosed my dad with Hashimoto's, and he's in one lab test, he's full blown hypothyroid, and in one lab test he just had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and there's a difference lab wise of whether you're hypothyroid needing thyroid replacement hormone. But anyway, I diagnosed him, and so then I thought he had no idea. So then I thought about diagnosing myself, and this was right around the time when I had a viral infection. It was pretty recent, and so I diagnosed myself and was like, oh, shoot. And then shortly thereafter had a virus, and was asymptomatic, mind you, too. I felt really good, felt really great. I never had any idea I had any thyroid problem or any autoimmunity. And then I got this virus. And then I went through a period of, I'm kind of coming out of it now for the last couple months, but I went through a period of 6 months of, fatigue and got sick a couple times and was just like really run down and, kind of more typical Hashimoto's symptoms where I just really did not feel like myself. And so that's been all, pretty recently. But now, and I already, like I said, I already worked with Hashimoto's patients, but now since being diagnosed or diagnosing myself, I've really just dove into the literature. And like you said, I'm trying to work on myself at the same time that I work on my patients. So I'll talk to my patients about it and say, hey, this is more what I feel. How do you feel it? And this is what my labs show. And this is how I do it. And so, yeah, I try to, I already really walked the walk, but now I'm really living the autoimmune life.
Wow. So, have you like checked for other autoimmune conditions? Because
Next, I'm
I,
checking for celiac next. I haven't done, I run on my patients the Cyrex multiple tissue autoimmune panel pretty often, and I haven't run that. I'm going to check for celiac next, and I'm checking for specific viruses. I do a lot of labs. They're actually just kind of sitting here to cover up the info, but I do a lot of LabCorp lab work. So that's what I've been monitoring so far, is looking at, my antibodies and my thyroid count and just like, my vitamin D and things. And I already did a lot of those things. I just hadn't really checked my thyroid antibodies for no real reason, but yeah.
wow. So, do you see that like with Hashimoto's, because when I had Hashimoto's, I never had any symptoms of Hashimoto's until the doctor kind of just brought it up and said, "Hey, do you know you have 180 antibodies in your thyroid? So like you have Hashimoto's." And he put me on Armorthroid right away. And like then I started feeling the actual symptoms of Hashimoto's. And I said,
Uh,
something's wrong here, because like these symptoms just amplified and I never had these symptoms before. And
yeah.
so I kind of just stopped everything. And I think like a lot of people, do you see that people actually have Hashimoto's and no symptoms, or?
I I, mm, I don't, because most people that come to me with symptoms, and they come to me because they're fatigued, they're anxious, they are constipated, they have bloating. Those are the biggest things that bring people into my practice, and then we go looking for it. And sometimes, because I specialize in autoimmunity, sometimes people seek me out because they've already been diagnosed, and then we're just trying to work on just managing the condition. But it's interesting with you because what I do see is sometimes people are just put on thyroid meds before they're hypothyroid, and their thyroid levels aren't bad yet. And what happens is, and I can explain this if for those if maybe they don't know, but there are three stages of all autoimmune diseases. There's stage one, which is the predictive antibodies, meaning you're having some autoimmune reactivity, but you have no symptoms. You just have antibodies. So sometimes those are caught on a screening. Like my wife has a cousin, I think that they caught her at puberty with like 2,000 level of 2,000 TPO antibodies. So sometimes they will catch high antibodies with no symptoms yet.
Mm-hmm.
Stage two is where you have symptoms. So that might be fatigue, that might be hair loss, that might be dry, flaky skin, that might be constipation, that might be anxiety, that might be any, lots of different things. And sometimes you don't know that you're having any symptoms. But
Mm-hmm.
then stage three in Hashimoto's is where you're hypothyroid. And that's where your immune system has damaged the thyroid long enough that now the tissue is permanently damaged and you're going to be hypothyroid. And that's the time to go on medication. But if you can catch it in stage two, which is where most people seek out, functional medicine care, if you can catch it in stage two, you can try to slow that process or stop that process or attempt to put it in remission, or at least prolong the amount of time that it takes to get to stage three. With Hashimoto's, it's one thing. With something like MS, it's a whole different story of if they don't see lesions on an MRI, it's not MS. But if you have antibodies and you're having neurological symptoms and things, we don't ever want to see lesions if we can prevent it. And Hashimoto's is similar, but it's different because you can be so affected at stage two.
So you help people in all three stages, right? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
even women who have their thyroids removed?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if they had Hashimoto's, because they likely have autoimmunity elsewhere. And with Hashimoto's, the most common other autoimmune antibodies are celiac is one, stomach is two, intrinsic factor or parietal cell, so more like a pernicious anemia, which means that you don't absorb B12 well, which means that you don't methylate well. And if you have on top of an MTHFR gene or something, that's bad news, but it's autoimmune. And sometimes those antibodies can also cause autoimmune gastritis. Those are number one, and number two, and three is myelin basic protein, which is demyelinating diseases such as MS. So there are often other autoimmunities. So yeah, if if you take out the thyroid, you haven't stopped the immune imbalance that is causing the problem in the first place.
Right. And even when I think like you get rid of, like, I mean, my Hashimoto's is gone, but my symptoms still persisted even after it was gone. So It's like there is no sort of, well, I don't want to say there's no hope for like not getting rid of your symptoms, but it's also a sign, I think, that there may be something else, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that you mentioned about just even, antibodies at some point, we were talking about it, but what's really weird is that somebody could have antibodies like TPO antibodies of 45
Uh-huh.
and they could feel horrible. And somebody else could have TPO antibodies of 1800 and they feel fine and they don't even notice it. So the antibody levels from person to person don't matter with regards to symptoms. They're an indication, but antibodies don't have any destructive properties. But you can look for change and you can catch people in different phases and their reactivity, their antibodies could be low, but they feel the worst of anybody. And so autoimmunity is a real interesting thing, and it goes in flares and remissions throughout your life, and it can change and things can spread, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. So the goal isn't to heal it, unfortunately. The goal is to manage it and try to keep it in remission.
Right. I completely agree with you. Something that helped me get back into remission was treating my adrenals. Like when, even though my thyroid numbers were crazy out of hand, when I started to take a simple adrenal extract, my thyroid numbers actually bounced back to normal within 2 weeks, from like a 6.4 to a 2.4. So
Mm.
I think,
With your TSH or with what?
with the TSH, yeah.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So I'm thinking, like even with my other autoimmune conditions, they must have all began with the adrenals being fatigued, or, and a
Yeah.
lot of women that I've dealt with also have adrenal fatigue. Is this something you look for?
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, we do look for it on like a cortisol panel, and we do address it and see it often. But there's also what I thought about with your case is there's adrenal autoimmunity,
Yeah.
and that's called a 21 hydroxylase antibody is what you look for. But that's the adrenal cortex, and that's an autoimmunity against the adrenals, and that's it can turn into something like Addison's disease. But if it doesn't, and it's the early stages, and you take an adrenal supplement and you don't get well, or you don't notice any change, I should say, sometimes it's autoimmunity. And so it's similar to the thyroid, that sometimes the thyroid isn't necessarily the problem, it's the autoimmunity and the immune system that's creating the inflammation.
Exactly. And with that, like I know you talk about different labs, and you're a really big fan of Cyrex. I use Cyrex as well. So
Yeah.
maybe you can even tell us like what you start off with, when you work with somebody.
Yeah, I have actually. I have a YouTube video called Autoimmune Labs, and I go through not necessarily the order that I go through with people, because everything's very customized in our office, but I go through like everything you'd ever want to see, like vitamin D and a CBC and a T and B lymphocyte panel, and like a lot of different things, and then I move into the Cyrex stuff, and it's I don't know how long it is. It's probably like 50 minutes, but if somebody really wants to see that, they can. But the things that we start off with are the basics. And sometimes we'll do the basics at the same time. But by the basics, I mean a CBC, vitamin D, a metabolic panel. I want to see liver enzymes. I want to see kidney function. I want to see how well are we clearing out toxins. With a CBC that costs, by the way, $5. I want to see immune balance. I want to see how anemic somebody is. On the metabolic panel, I want to see their bilirubin. I want to see like these basics that we call the low-hanging fruit. And if nobody's ever had a physician run through those with them, then we start there. Because a lot of times people will bring me their labs and they'll say, oh, the hospital or the doctor ran a ton of labs. And it's like very, very basic. But nobody ever, and I said, well, you're you're on the anemic side. I won't say you're anemic. I won't label them or diagnose them unless they're in that range, but I'll say you're on the anemic side. Has anybody ever mentioned this to you? And I'll find things like, well, you're pre-diabetic. Has anybody ever mentioned this to you? And a lot of times they've never had it mentioned. So those low-hanging fruit are the big ones. But as we move into more specific, higher level autoimmune panels, with Cyrex, there's one called a multiple tissue autoimmune panel that looks at 24 different tissues, and we'll often run that if somebody comes in and they know they have autoimmunity. Like somebody came in the other day and she had celiac, but she was diagnosed 12 years ago, and she kind of knows, and she has Hashi's also, and she kind of knows that she probably had it for years before. So
Mhm.
I said, well, let's see where else it is. And the number one reason why is if it's attacking your brain, there's a different level of scare factor to that, I think. And I don't mean I'm trying to scare people, but you act on that. You don't want autoimmunity attacking your brain or your joints or your gut. The
Right.
gut is, in functional medicine in general, the gut is a good place to start, of course. So looking at gut autoimmunity is something that I think not a lot of practitioners do. Looking at a stool test is something that we do, looking for parasites, looking for overgrowths. And it really, for us, depends on what somebody comes in with. So if somebody comes in and they say, oh, I should have unplugged our fridge, it just turned off and it's so much quieter. But if somebody comes in and they're can't get out of bed in the morning and can't fall asleep at night and has a afternoon slump and really matches up with adrenal fatigue, then we're going to look at their cortisol profile. If somebody comes in with maybe constipation and fatigue and a lot of bloating, but not necessarily adrenal type fatigue, then we're going to look at the gut first. And sometimes I'll recommend, hey, let's look at these three things. And somebody might say, we give people choices. So they might say, oh, I'll do the first two. But a lot of times my patients say, yeah, let's do it all. So we'll do sometimes a urinary organic acids test, or, I see a lot of mold patients that have like autoimmunity and also have crazy symptoms like anxiety and racing heart out of nowhere, and just autonomics, change in blood pressure, change in heart rate, change in temperature, and they know they've been exposed to mold, and we're kind of investigating that. So anyway, long answer to a short question, but there's a lot of different labs. And really, I think that if a practitioner has like their protocol that they do for everybody, I don't know that that's appropriate, at least not in the model. Maybe if you only treat one type of patient, but in our model, we see a lot of different things.
Wow. So, and you work virtually, or do they?
Yeah. So we do video chats like this, and we do a lot of phone consults, and we have I'm sitting in my I have a vitamin and supplement store, and we ship supplements from our store, but I've just started using a full script account, so getting people on protocols through full script. But yeah, we do.
Amazing.
Yeah,
And
and we try to find, sometimes it's the toughest thing sometimes is we use LabCorp. So if there's a LabCorp nearby, that's what we use. Or if there's a private lab, then they can go and get their Cyrex draws, and we can send them lab test kits and things like that.
amazing. Yeah. So if you can help anybody anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can absolutely try, yes. But yeah, we can help them, of course. Yeah.
Great. And I know earlier we were talking about like the scratch it method.
Yeah.
I really want you to share that because it was super fascinating. I've never heard this anywhere else. And I know a lot of women can get insight from it.
Yeah, so we use a concept in our office, and when I'm on a video chat with people in my office, I do a lot of drawings for people, and virtually I haven't found a way to like our software that we use for our video consults and for our note taking and for sharing documents and sharing labs, and it is called Healthy, and it's really cool actually because we have patients do They can do food journaling on patients, measure their blood sugar and send me their numbers every day, and they can take pictures of their food and upload it. But I haven't found a way to draw on it. But this is a great teaching tool. So, and I learned this from a mentor of mine, Dr. Tom Colleton, in Austin, Texas, who's a friend and a teacher of Datis Karazian's, who's a mentor of mine also. And so Dr. Tom says, if you scratch your hand and you just keep scratching for an hour, for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year, your hand is going to get damaged, right? It's going to bleed. It's going to eventually scar and scab and scar and cause irreversible tissue damage. So what is the solution? The solution is to stop scratching. So what are the things that are scratching? Foods, toxins, stress, hormones, and hidden infections. And now with each of those, you could subcategorize those as foods as, gluten and dairy first and second. Mm-hmm. And then there are a lot of others. And toxins, there are, certain ones that are more associated with Hashimoto's or with certain conditions. And stress, that's just something that we work on with everybody to manage. But I would throw in there the adrenal component. Hormones, there are 3 hormone surges that can flare autoimmunity. They're insulin, cortisol, high or low, cortisol defects, and estrogen surges. That's why women often get autoimmune flares around puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And then the bugs. The bugs are things like Lyme disease, EBV, Candida, parasites. There was another one I was going to say. Mold. Mold is a bug. So different things like that. You look through all those different scratchers, and if you can stop scratching, the inflammation will stop and will heal, and you'll stop at least making it worse.
Exactly. And then, I know genetics plays into this some way, somehow.
So yeah, when I told you this, you said, well, really? Well, you don't think there's a genetic component? I said, well, I do. But if you don't scratch your genes, then you don't turn them on. But yeah, I absolutely do. So what are you going to say?
And a lot of the women, I have in this group, they have that MTHFR gene, which kind of, makes your system not, I guess, the detoxification process a lot harder, right?
It does, but here's my thoughts on MTHFR is that it's just the most famous.
Okay.
I would almost say that, and it's also common, but there are so many SNPs in the glutathione pathways, and the SNPs that predispose you for autoimmunity are what's called the HLA-DQ genes. And then like some mold things are HLA-DR genes. I sometimes get those HLAs mixed up, but I think I said it right. Celiac and also other autoimmunities and Hashimoto's as well, different alleles of that. But the MTHFR is one of many genes that we have doing many important parts. So I think that it has certainly gotten the most buzz, and it matters. It certainly matters. I have another YouTube video about MTHFR and methylation. But here's what I want to see with that is how well is somebody truly methylating, and looking at a marker like homocysteine or methylmalonic acid, or seeing, because you could have the gene and you could be scratching it and turning it on, or you could have the gene and you could not be turning it on. So you could have the gene and you could be getting enough B12, you could be eating a lot of dark leafy greens, you could be giving yourself folate and B12, and you're methylating just fine, but you might be having problems in your glutathione pathways or these other pathways. And then there are other even methylation genes like the COMT, the COMT genes, that is a methylation gene, but it clears out toxic estrogens. So it's still the same conversation, but MTHFR, I think it's easy to remember because it looks like a bad word.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do have it. I personally have one of each of the 677 and the 1298, but my homocysteine is fine. My methylation seems to be fine. And I sometimes even don't respond very well to methyl donors. I get some anxiety, and some people are over methylators. So methylation is something that some people, you read about it and it's like, gosh, everybody needs it. But in a unique and individualized, personalized model, not everybody responds well to methyl donors. But yeah, it's very, very common, and it's at least made the genetic world get some attention, and it is important.
Absolutely. And I think with the women I have in this organization, they're concerned about it because of the weight gain. They think it's causing them to not be able to lose the weight that they've gained through Hashimoto's.
Mm.
And I don't know, like for me, I've always been very athletic. My weight did fluctuate, but I've always had a pretty clean diet, and I'm pretty simple. Like I eat twice a day. And then sometimes I do fasting, but I don't really, to keep my insulin levels afloat, I don't like to eat every 5 minutes or 6 meals a day. I just don't think that's necessary for my body. But I know a lot of women who experience weight issues with Hashimoto's. What do you want to say about that?
It is really, really common, of course, and I don't know what to say about the weight, but one thing that you said about the blood sugar, one thing that we say about weight is let's work on what we know is going on, and let's see if what's supposed to happen happens. Because a lot of women they're exercising like a lot, and they're eating pretty well as far as like calorie wise. But I'll say let's work on what we know we can work on, like methylation or like inflammation, or like a lot of women will come into me and they might even look fairly fit, but they're not the weight that they want to be. They're maybe 20 or 30 pounds overweight, but then their vitamin D will be 26, and their homocysteine will be 13, and their C-reactive protein inflammatory marker will be 4.0, and which isn't astronomical, but it's like, boy, let's get these numbers where they're supposed to be, and let's see if weight doesn't start coming off. But then we do a lot of metabolic work too. My expertise, even like before autoimmunity, was starting to be keto, and then I realized a lot of people are doing keto wrong. So I teach it a little bit differently, and it's a tool in my tool belt. But I didn't want to become known as like the keto guy, because I don't think that it's always appropriate. But there are times when it's appropriate. But the other thing I was going to say about the blood sugar, and we'll get patients to measure their blood sugar. I think it's the most useful thing that people can really do. It's good to have metrics like labs, but labs are relatively expensive, and the scale is relatively horrible. So it's good to have some kind of a metric. Like I wear an Aura ring that measures my sleep, and measuring your blood sugar has been so phenomenal for so many of my patients. But I do see a lot of women who really don't have high blood sugar or pre-diabetes, but they have reactive hypoglycemia, and their blood sugar dips, and then it fires off their adrenals, and then it's like along with their fatigue and their adrenal component is this blood sugar component, and sometimes they do have to start by eating more often to balance, so they just get rid of some spikes and crashes. But then we want them getting to where, kind of you said you were, more of an intermittent fasting schedule, and not every day of the week. There's actually something that we teach, and I got this from another mentor of mine, of course, Dr. Dan Pompa. It's called a 5-1-1 rule. It's 5 days a week of intermittent fasting, 1 day a week of full fasting, going dinner to dinner. So maybe you eat dinner Tuesday night, and on Wednesday you don't eat until dinner Wednesday night. And then 1 day a week of feasting. And the feasting day, I just explained this to somebody today who we kind of suspect Hashimoto's. We're running labs. But I was explaining this to her today. The feast day is the most important. The feast day reminds your body that it's not starving. And the feast day is what makes the intermittent fasting schedule work better, really. But sometimes in thyroid patients, we need to do 2 feast days. So a 4-2-1, 4 days a week of an intermittent fasting in like a 14 to 16, usually around maybe 15 to 16 hour window,
Hmm.
1 day a week of full fasting, usually a midweek day, and then one midweek day of feasting. And that's not pizza, ice cream, and beer, but it's just more calories, more carbs, reminding your body that it's not starving so that it doesn't get stingy with its fat stores and hang on to them for later.
Right. And have you seen like issues with the reverse T3 levels when somebody does that? Because isn't that like the starvation sort
If
of?
if somebody comes in, when we see problems is when somebody has found out about keto, or like they read about it online
Mhm.
and they started it 3 months ago and they lost 20 pounds the first month and they felt great, best they've ever felt or something. And then here we are 3 months later, 2 months later, and they don't feel good. And I'll see reverse T3 elevated, or I'll see free T3 kind of tank, or even just T3, kind of go down, and their metabolic rate goes down. So that's why the variation keeps your body guessing. If you just low carb for forever, for too long, your body's gonna kind of backfire on you. But it's a tool in the tool belt to kind of go in for periods of time and go out for periods of time, or do the weekly variation like the 5-1-1 or the 4-2-1.
I see. So it kind of is a little, it doesn't matter like which day of the week you do it or.
5-1-1, the one feast day is, almost always a Saturday.
I see.
For most people, they're going to eat a little more that day, and they might go out at night or something. But their fast day, it doesn't matter, but it's usually a midweek day. I don't think the two of those should be back to back. But if you were doing a 4-2-1, then it would matter. You would want to, I wouldn't do any of the two in a row. So maybe a feast day on Monday, then an intermittent fasting day, then a fasting day, then an intermittent fasting day, then an intermittent fasting day Friday, then a feast day, and just, kind of varying it, but refueling your body more than once a week. Another thing with just, kind of mistakes that I've seen in the keto low carb world, because it can be helpful, but I'm not a keto guy, and like I said, for a lot of people it's just not appropriate. And a big mistake too is dairy. In the autoimmune world, there's a lot of dairy in
Keto.
internet keto. But another mistake that we see, shoot, I just lost. Oh no, it's not a mistake. It's a strategy. Sorry. Is like the week before your period, you carb load a little bit more, and the other 3 weeks or so of the month, you're not as high carb. So there's some ways that you can kind of plan this around your cycle. That's pretty individualized when we do that or recommend that with the patient, but there are some strategies that can hack that. But I don't think that it's in measuring, once again, measuring blood sugar and measuring ketones. That's another top mistake I would say is, spend the $50 and get a Keto Mojo and know where your levels are and how your body's responding, or you're going to get frustrated with it. Those are some of my top recommendations for that.
I see. And in terms of, because like, yeah, when I did intermittent fasting, I was like, am I starving myself? I don't want to, increase my RT3 levels even further. And my T3 was kind of on the low side. It wasn't like completely like zero or anything, but it was around like 64 at the time. But everything else was normal, and usually like people that I've seen and are in this like group as well, they come to me and they're like, nothing else is really off besides the T3, the free T3. And like from my knowledge, isn't that the most important?
Yes, that's the amount. It's a small fraction of T3, but it's the one that gets into the cells. So absolutely, it's the one that matters. And also a couple things. One, not eating enough will lower your metabolic rate. Not eating enough will lower your thyroid hormone, no doubt. So sometimes if somebody's low T3, that's the first thing is, are you eating enough? So with the intermittent fasting, Dan Pompa again has a saying. He says, don't eat less often.
Right.
So don't eat fewer calories, but eat less often. But some days you're fasting and some days you're feasting, but you're not trying to starve yourself. You're just changing the time. It's more of a circadian thing, which is another topic I'm really, really into, is the circadian mechanism. But another thing I was going to say is that is a low T3. That's pretty low that you said 64. And so when you said something earlier about being on Armour-Throid without, being that low, I would say that's pretty low. So that's, and I don't know, depending on who you're working with and stuff, there are lab ranges, but we look at functional ranges. And so the functional ranges aren't diagnostic, but it's like, hey, this is optimal. And this is where we want you to be. And you don't have hypothyroidism, but this is an indication that you're lower than we want you to be. So if you're a 64, what can we do to raise that up to an 84 and then a 104? And can we do some diet, nutrition, lifestyle strategies, supplement strategies, especially to raise that value up? Or is it time to go on a med like an Armour-Throid, or for most people like a Synthroid or a levothyroxine?
Yeah, exactly. And I think even then, like, those medications are just a crutch, right? They're not
Yeah,
really
yeah.
solving the problem.
They're certainly not there, and because especially in Hashimoto's, the problem is the immune system, like we said. But I do think there comes a time and a place where somebody's, and I just even like if somebody has low T3 and they are your age, I can't tell how old you are, but if they are your age, I'm going to try to see if we can get that up, because the body's going to respond and the body's going to heal. And even with somebody my dad's age, that's what we've been doing, is doing some nutritional strategies. And he's going to get labs tomorrow morning, but he's 65. If his labs aren't good, if he's still hypo, I'm going to recommend that he go on meds. And I'm a non-prescriber. I don't prescribe meds. I know a lot about the different meds and the differences, but I'll just tell my patients, hey, we have to work with your prescriber, and maybe you're going to do better on this or this based on what we're seeing on your labs. But yeah, so if his thyroid responds, because remember I said we did 2 labs on him. The first one, he was barely not hypothyroid. The second one, he was barely diagnostically hypothyroid. So I'm hoping and believing in the body's ability to heal, and we've been working on some things, doing some nutritional strategies, some supplement protocols. I'm hoping that his numbers are going to be back to where it's like, okay, you don't need to go on meds right now, but we need to keep an eye on this, and we need to keep working on this. And I'd like to prolong that process as long as possible, and hopefully avoid him ever having to go on them would be the best.
Exactly. And like in terms of the keto, because I know you seem like you're a big fan of the keto, but not the internet way. There's a different way that I'm not familiar with yet, that you're going to have to inform me about.
It's not different. It's just avoiding all those mistakes and just doing it the right way, and for the people that need it. Because I would say the majority of my practice would not do well on a keto diet. So I don't use it. If somebody comes in and they have high blood sugar and they're diabetic, or they're, I just had a diabetic patient who is hypothyroid, and she probably has Hashis. But what we did first is we're working on her diabetes, and she's almost got it reversed. And I want her to reverse diabetes. She's been on thyroid meds for like 20 years, and she's very overweight, or was, and is diabetic. And I said, let's get this under control first through your habits, and then we're going to move into other things. But that's the opposite of most of my practice. Most of my practice, women, 30s and 40s and 50s, but probably 40 is probably the average age in my practice. And I see more hypoglycemia. And so we're more measuring blood sugar, and we might eventually be headed towards keto, but we may not ever even get there. But gradually going lower and lower carb and counting carbs. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, like the person I was with this today, she said, oh, I've never done keto, but she eats paleo and she does CrossFit. She's probably in ketosis. And I think that most people that are gluten-free, especially grain-free, if you do an AIP type diet and you exercise like at all, and you don't eat all fruit, you're probably in ketosis already and you don't even know it. So keto's a fad, kind of like MTHFR, and that's why I don't want you to say that you feel like I'm really into keto, but it is a really useful tool in the tool belt if somebody has that problem or wants to lose weight, or it's amazing for brain fog. It's unbelievable when somebody gets into ketosis, that they just feel the sharpest they've ever felt. But once again, like I said, that kind of fades out after a while. So you can kind of go in and go out, or you can do things smart, or you can do like even a cyclical seasonal diet. Like in the winter, things are a lot of carbs and fruits aren't in season, especially if you're of Caucasian descent. If you're of a different descent, then your genes have different seasonality. But for a Caucasian descent, we grew up, or our ancestors rather, with not a lot of fruit, not a lot of carbs in the winter, and shorter light cycles. Then in the summer, things grow. So that's a time for more carbs, for more fruit. It's more of a circadian way, but it's not a 24-hour circadian. It's more of a seasonal way of eating. And that's another thing that, kind of encourage more of like an ancestral paleo type way of looking at your diet.
I see. And like these diets, do they impact your thyroid levels? Like, if you do, I know like there's been a lot of research that talks about keto and T3 levels being lower if you go on keto, or like AIP, like not the carbs missing, or like not taking in a certain food group or a category of macros.
I have not seen that at all. Like I said, I've seen people that come in with that because they've done the restriction for too long. But when we do the variation, and that's why the feast days are so important, and that's why 2 feast days for a thyroid patient, because we don't want to restrict calories. We don't want to starve the body. And I don't ever see that like from a grain-free perspective. I don't see any health problems in people avoiding that food group. What I do see, and I think this might be a good topic too, but what I do see is somebody on an AIP diet, or somebody who's had autoimmunity for a while and is well researched and things, their diet is very restrictive and they're not eating enough variety of foods. And that variety, especially fiber variety, and that's another thing on keto, is like it needs to be plant-based. You need to still get fiber. And I'm not a fan of carnivore, but I'm like kind of exploring it, just reading about it and listening to it, because I've had friends. I mentioned to you my friend with ulcerative colitis. He's had great results on carnivore, and I had another friend who had like all these crazy hormonal menstrual problems and infertility, and had great results on carnivore. I can't wrap my head around it being healthy.
Wow.
But it's crazy and it's out there. But anyway, I think that lack of variety can limit your microbiome diversity, and also your body's tolerance. And diversity helps support tolerance. And
Right.
tolerance, we mentioned this off the air a little bit of and we talked about how does somebody with Hashimoto's also have celiac, or also have RA, or also have, myelin basic MS. And that's because your body loses what's called tolerance.
Right.
And tolerance is the ability to distinguish good guys from bad guys. And so you want your body to have a robust immune system for things like, COVID, or a flu, or a cold, or or Epstein-Barr virus or anything like that. You want a good, healthy immune system. You just don't want it attacking yourself. When your body loses tolerance, then it attacks self-tissue, and that's the definition of autoimmunity. And so oral tolerance is a big part of autoimmunity, and that's more the gut involvement. And your body loses oral tolerance, and then it attacks food proteins, and then it's lost tolerance, and it will attack self-tissue because of that, and because of different things like molecular mimicry and intestinal permeability and these just different things. But when you only have a certain select number of foods, your body loses tolerance. And a metaphor that I use with my patients sometimes is, if you live in a small town, the cops kind of see you all the time, they're going to kind of know if you're up to something. If you live in Las Vegas, or you live in Chicago, or you live in Salt Lake, or you live in Los Angeles, New York, you kind of blend in, right? You got to be doing something pretty bad to be in trouble. And that's the same thing with these food proteins. If you're eating them all the time, if you're eating eggs every day, you're likely to develop a sensitivity to it. The problem with grains and dairy, and they're big triggers no matter what, but they're in everything. So like, you know, most American breakfast, standard American, is milk and cereal or bagels and cream cheese, or, you know, some form of grains and dairy. And then at night it's pasta, and it's, you know, a lasagna, or it's a Mexican dish with cheese and tortillas, and like it's grains and dairy, grains and dairy, grains and dairy. So we've developed these sensitivities because we're exposing our immune system to these things all the time. And so that's another concept of just the variety, is keep your body guessing, and then it's not like flagging you as a bad guy.
That makes sense, because when I was younger, I would, like, if I started eating watermelon, I would eat watermelon for like 3 months, you know, and I was like hooked, you know, but then I wouldn't realize that the body becomes intolerant to foods that are like you're addicted to, basically.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, because like then I started, when I found out I had Hashimoto's, I made it a goal that I'm gonna switch up my food every week. Like I would have new breakfasts, new lunches, new dinners every single week, and see how I felt, because incorporating different colors and like having different vegetables and fruits it's I thought it was like important. But you know, as somebody who has autoimmune, you're kind of in a chicken and the egg situation. Like, you know, should I restrict myself to get rid of this inflammation, or should I just eat everything in the world and, you know, just be more immune to it?
Give me a sec here. I'm gonna I got something in my throat.
Yeah, no worries.
First off, what you did is awesome. And even if you weren't trying to induce tolerance, you're just trying to get, you know, micronutrient diversity and eating the colors of the rainbow. It does induce tolerance by getting all that variety. Is really, really good for your immune system. The other thing I was going to mention, though, is that you said, you know, should I restrict all these foods to reduce the inflammation? And I see a lot in the autoimmune world, because there's a lot of books and you know, things about autoimmunity, and it's all diet and gut related, and it's really, 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 really important. But what if, you know, some people will diet themselves to death, and they're so restrictive, and first off, they're losing tolerance, but they're causing more stress by thinking about their diet. And it's like, what's the payoff? So sometimes you got to change your mindset around your diet. And sometimes if it's torturous and you hate it, and it's like, when am I done? Then you might be causing more stress that's flaring your autoimmunity more. And the other thing, we could talk about that too, but that for a sec. The other thing is that sometimes you're overlooking some of the other scratchers. So don't beat yourself over the head. It's good to look at your food. Your food matters. Your food is very important. It's kind of step one, because you're doing it all the time. and it is the most common cause of autoimmune conditions. But don't overlook the others. Sometimes there's a virus or there's something else that's going on, and you can't overlook the other scratchers.
Wow, so that's a lot to think about right there. I mean, I think we touched upon so many different things, from labs to the reverse T3 to the scratchers to the different diets. And I think I want to end this interview with maybe one more question. And that could be like your sort of takeaways for the women and how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. I think that my number one takeaway for Hashimoto's is, it kind of sucks to tell people this sometimes, but it's you can get it into remission, you can get autoimmunity into remission, but it's not reversible. And just know you can, like you've done, I mean, you can heal it, you can get it into remission, but it's a marathon and not a sprint. And sometimes you get one fire put out and another one will come on, and it's a marathon and not a sprint. So you got to set a good pace. You don't want to get burned out. I don't believe in doing all the lab testing at once or trying to look at all 5 of these at once. We have to kind of rule out which one is probably the biggest trigger for you. We use different questionnaires, different symptom surveys, different history, things to lead us towards like, okay, we need to work on your sleep while we raise vitamin D and while we do these supplement protocols and anti-inflammatory and gut work. We need to work on your lifestyle strategies as well. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And so many times an autoimmune patient, like when they're working with somebody, especially, I think, and probably working on their own, but when you're in it, you're like, man, oh man, is this ever going to get better? And then you look back and you're like, oh wow, it has gotten a lot better. And we use use a lot of metaphors, but if you're taking baby steps in the right direction, sometimes it can feel like you've got a mile or a long ways to go. But if you just keep taking baby steps, when you look back at where you started, you realize that you've covered a lot of ground. And so that's our encouragement to our patients, is just keep taking baby steps. The other thing along those lines, I forget what the second thing you said was. I think you said how people can get a hold of us, but I mentioned before that I have an ebook on the 10 steps of autoimmune eating. And it's just, it's really a framework for how to eat for autoimmunity, and some choices and some options. And everybody's going to wind up at a different step as kind of their standard. Like you might be gluten-free as your standard, and you might play around with dairy-free, or you might go nightshade-free, and you might come back down a step, or you might go all the way. And so the top steps are kind of like the AIP. Below that is kind of paleo. And below that, the very bottom steps are kind of clean eating. So we do have an ebook. I have my YouTube channel that I've recently just kind of started doing. And you can find that through my Instagram account at Autoimmune Doc. That's how we connected. Through my clinic is Washington Wellness Center. So our website is Wash Wellness Center, Wash, W-A-S-H, washwellnesscenter.com. And we've got a ton of videos on autoimmune and articles and recipes and like info about labs and just a lot of good stuff on there. But, social media is a great way to just, connect with us. We've got an email list and all that stuff if you want to kind of hear from us all the time. But if anybody's looking for care, we do free 15-minute phone consults. So, I had a patient earlier today that's from California. We do virtual consults. I also had a few people that were local here. And so we do both. Our kind of software service that we use allows for video chats. We can share and upload documents, do labs, do food journaling, do all that stuff. So it's pretty cool. And yeah, you can get a hold of us a lot of different ways. And yeah.
Great. Well, I'll be linking all your like the social media the platforms you're on, and your website, and also like the contact page. I'm sure that they can get in touch with you there. And when the ebook comes out, let me know. Definitely going to share that. And until then, I hope to maybe meet you one day in person, or you can join us at one of our retreats and
Yeah, that would be super
hopefully
cool.
do a autoimmune talk for us.
Yeah, yeah, that would be super cool. I'm honored to be here. You know, my practice and my presence has been mostly local and you know in Salt Lake, and I've always seen virtual clients, but now I'm really starting to try to put content out and try to get myself known because I feel like my expertise is growing, and I'm just trying to reach and help. And really, the other thing that I'd say about last thing, I swear I'll be quiet, but the one thing that I would say too that I kind of forgot is become an autoimmune student. If you have an autoimmune disease, I luckily was already an autoimmune student, but if you that's what I encourage my patients. And we have a lending library, and for our virtual clients, we'll recommend them things. We'll send them podcast episodes. We'll send them ebooks. But become an autoimmune student and learn about what's going on in the process and the things that you can measure and the things that you can take and the things that you can do, and just keep learning that for the rest of your life and keep trying and implementing new things. And that's kind of a good recipe for success.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great night.
All right.